Welcome, everybody. We are kicking off a new year of Torah study, of deepening our connection, deepening our awareness. And I'm excited that you're here on this beautiful rapid fire course, which is what we're studying here today. It's a rapid fire course, which means we're going to be moving quickly. This fits with my attention span. It's short and sweet. Get to the point. If you can't get to the point right away, you lost me, Good to see you, Josette. Shalom. Welcome. So, when I read a book, I always open the middle of the book. If you got my attention in the first page and a half, I go to the beginning. Otherwise, I can't. Antonella, shalom, make yourself comfortable. Great to see everybody. Thank you for your help. Thank you for being here. And Ashley, thank you for the setup. Rabbi, so we're ready to go? Good, fantastic. Okay. I'd like to start over the story. A story about a progressive Jewish family in the Upper East Side of Manhattan. They were Jewish, but they were atheists, and they weren't interested in their children getting any form of Jewish education, but they couldn't send their kids to public school either. Just doesn't work, that system. So they decided to send their child to the best private school in Manhattan, Trinity College. After the first few days in school, the kid comes home. It's a Christian school, of course. Dad asked him, "No, so what did you learn today?" And the son, the little boy, 7 years old, he says, "Dad, I learned about the Trinity. I learned about the Father, the Son, and the..." Dad gets really upset, holds his son by the lapel, and he says, "You listen, and you listen well. There's only one God, and we don't believe in him." We Jews have struggled with our faith from the very beginning of time, since the beginning of the inception of Judaism. I'd like to welcome, of course, all the people on Zoom. It's Ed Hockman, Joni. I see Susan Cole, Warren from Virginia, maybe either in Lake House. I can't remember exactly where you are. Marty and Susan Jackwitz, shalom. Gladys from Century Village, and I don't know who A is. But it's great to see everybody. Welcome. Feel free to send me an email, by the way, with any questions, comments, responses, or critique to rabbi@jewishgardens.com. I'd love to hear from you. That's rabbi@jewishgardens.com. So we Jews have struggled with our relationship with the divine for thousands of years. It all started with our forefather, Abraham, 3,760 odd years ago. Abraham was a great guy, and he championed a radically new understanding of a single, omnipotent, invisible, supreme being. Anybody know what Abraham's last name was? Abraham Ha'ivri, Abraham the Hebrew. Why was he called the Hebrew? What does it mean to be a Hebrew? I love teaching this idea. Hebrew means
wrestle with God.
Not wrestling with God. What do you say, Josette? Yep. Over the river. That's right. Ever Nahal means the other side of the river, because Abraham was a weirdo. He was just so radically different to everybody else. Everybody else was living like good, loyal citizens, pagans, worshiping idols, worshiping the sun, the moon, the stars, the river, the pharaoh, whoever the king was. They were worshiping, this idol, that idol. Everybody was behaving like moral, upright citizens. And Abraham has to introduce this crazy notion of an invisible, omnipotent, a single, supreme being that's almighty. I said, "You're just weird." So they called him a Hebrew, which means the other side of the river, like he's on the other side of the train tracks. He's got a different idea over there. And this is Abraham, who really, we just mentioned moments ago, Abraham was the most influential person who lived upon the face of this earth in the history of mankind. I challenge you to find another human being that was more influential than Abraham. We were just talking about the Museum of Abrahamic Faiths in Abu Dhabi, which is Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. That covers about half of the citizens of planet Earth, which I believe just hits 8 billion, right? And that's just in our lifetime today. Think of every generation, previous generations, for the past 110 generations since Abraham. He has influenced more people than anybody else with his monotheistic approach, the belief in one God. And it's been a radical idea that Abraham introduced us to. But the question is, who is this God? So Abraham is the first Jew. He's introduced us to the idea of God. But if you want to get to know God, you want to get into a relationship with God, you got to know a little bit more about God. So who is he? And how do we nurture a relationship with this God? That's what this course is all about today. We're going to be covering 25 of the most popular questions about God, FAQs, frequently asked questions about God. We're going to be asking questions like, today we're going to ask 4 questions. What is God? Where is God? Who created God? And is God a he or a she? Right? We're going to be asking questions like, can God create a rock that's too heavy for him to lift? Interesting, right? We're going to talk about things like, does God ever make a mistake? Can God ever change his mind? Why did he create us? Does he really need us? Why did God create evil? Or did he create evil? Interesting. Am I allowed to question God? Why is God described as wrathful or jealous? Why do I need to fear him? Who came up with that idea, being afraid of God? Is there proof that God exists? Why can't I see him? Can we reconcile God with science? And do all religions lead to the same God? These are just some of the questions that we're going to be addressing over the next 6 sessions of the seminar. It's going to be fun. It's going to be quick moving. It's going to be rapid fire. So let's get this started. For starters, I'd like to ask you, why do we care? Why is it important to deepen our understanding of God? Why is that important for us to do? There's actually a deep-rooted human need in learning about the nature of God, because humans, by our very nature, have a need to feel accomplished and achieved. You know, they tell a story of a prisoner. You know what story I'm about to say? Of a prisoner
No, I don't know this one.
who spent years in the dungeon over there turning a wheel. He spent years turning a wheel. It's a metaphor. It might have happened. He was turning a wheel and he was envisioning about how behind this wall there must be a river, and he's lifting buckets of water and he's watering the stream and these canals and he's irrigating fields, and he was thinking about all the flowers and the playgrounds and all the joy and the laughter that he's bringing to this world by turning this wheel for 8 hours a day. After 5 years in prison, he comes out and he says, the first thing I want to see is the fruit of my labor, the work of the effort of my hands. Let me see what's behind the wall. And as he goes behind the wall, he's so excited, he sees a screw. Just a screw, nothing else. A screw. He was turning a screw for 5 years, 8 hours a day. And when this happens, he has a heart attack. He dies. So metaphor, it's not a real story. But the idea is that human beings need purpose, need a higher calling. And if you don't have a purpose, it's very dangerous. Very, very dangerous. I always say there's nothing more dangerous than people that have too much time on their hands. Right? You got to be careful. So we have this deep-rooted need, and we look to spiritual realms to meet this need. In fact, Dr. Lisa Miller is a New York Times best-selling author and award-winning researcher. And she, in her research, has concluded that faith is actually good for our health from a scientific perspective. Our brains are naturally inclined towards spirituality, and they become more resilient and robust with faith. There's been many studies to show that cancer patients who have faith are able to heal better than those who don't. You know, in Israel, they have clowns that come to the hospitals to cheer up the cancer patients because they find that joy, laughter, happiness is not just a distraction, it's actually a spiritual, a powerful spiritual aid to healing. Let's read this idea in the textbook on page 3 in the student textbook from Dr. Lisa Miller. Page 3, text number 1 reads as follows. Each of us is endowed with a natural capacity to perceive a greater reality and consciously connect to the life force that moves in, through and around us. Whether or not we participate in a spiritual practice or adhere to a faith tradition, whether or not we identify as religious or spiritual, our brain has a natural inclination toward and docking station for spiritual awareness. This looks like a mistake. Our brain has a natural inclination towards a docking station for spiritual awareness. The awakened brain is the neural circuitry that allows us to see the world more fully and thus enhance our individual, societal, and global well-being. I didn't set out to study spirituality per se. My discovery of the awakened brain began with the desire to understand human resilience and help people who are struggling. Bit by bit, striking data points and my patients' stories of hurt and healing helped me see that spiritual experience was a vital, though overlooked, component of healing. I've discovered that the awakened brain, the spiritually excited brain, is both inherent to our physiology and invaluable to our health and functioning. So from a purely natural, scientific perspective, it's important for us to answer this question, to deepen our quest to understand, to define the divine, as we call this course, but also from a Jewish perspective as well. Is it appropriate? What do you think? What is your opinion on whether it's appropriate to question your faith? Is it heretical? Is it unacceptable to question your faith? Anybody, any thoughts?
I think it's okay.
You think it's okay? Why?
That's what we're about. Yeah.
You know, Dan, you're originally from Russia, right? Ukraine, actually. I'm sorry. Sorry, I apologize. I do apologize. Ukraine. You know, back there, you couldn't question your Soviet Union. You weren't allowed to question, Mother Russia.
Right.
That was dangerous, right? That was obviously an unhealthy society. Anybody else agree or disagree with that? Yes, sir.
I was taught we always question
You were taught that by rabbis or by heretics?
by rabbis, and I don't know what a heretic is.
Okay, that's a nice point. You can argue about that. What is a heretic? Yes, Rosin.
Yes, I think you should always question. This is how you learn.
Hello, did anybody go to Cheder over here like 60, 70 years ago? And when you ask the question in Cheder and the teacher will go, touch and pun him, you can't ask why. Nobody experienced that yet. Joseph? You were a what? What did you call it?
She was wrong. I was a grown.
A grown up, okay. A grown up.
And I asked, the rabbi answered.
Now, you were raised in Egypt, right?
Yeah, but this happened in America.
Oh, in America. Okay. Okay, Joseph is an Egyptian Jew. But once I want to comment on that a second. So you asked a question to the rabbi questioning faith, and he says, I'm sorry, you're not allowed to go there.
I wasn't questioning faith. I was questioning a question.
This is the way it is, and that's it. This is what you have to do. Right. Try to tell that to American kids today. Not happening. Going. Yeah, Mike?
It's inherently human. We learn by failure. We learn by trying. We don't learn just because somebody told us that something is so. It's
Okay.
part of the learning process.
So I can, yes, Ayat.
Creative free will, so I think God kind of expects us to take it for a ride, try it out.
Kick the tires a little.
Yeah.
Test it out. Okay. So it's, Keith?
Are we always interpreting and questioning what's in the Torah and how it applies?
Are we always doing that? That's what we're doing here, Chabad, that's for sure. Yes, Al.
If you think that faith is the area beyond fact, and as you pointed out, I think in the last sermon, that we're always learning something more. What we knew in 1840 isn't the same thing that we knew in 1940 or 2040. We're always pushing the boundary, but still there is an area of faith that's out there beyond that. And
okay, I love these points. How beautiful ideas that are being shared here. I just want to tie them all together for a moment. So I think that, as Jews, we were never missionaries. You never found a Jewish missionary. We weren't going out and standing on street corners and say, would you like to become Jewish? Right? We don't do that kind of stuff. We don't open missions in Africa or China or Peru to be able to convert people by giving them food and say, now you're going to be Jewish. On the contrary, you want to become Jewish, we're going to make it really difficult to make sure that you really, really, really want to do this, right? Because we're not in the popularity business. We're so confident in our faith that we don't weaken our faith when somebody else believes something differently. Some of our cousins, a little different, right? Our cousins have been very threatened when other people believe differently, right? And I'm talking about Crusader Europe. I'm talking about Almohad Spain and Iberian Peninsula. If you believe differently from us, it's up with your head, right? With Jews, we're like, just let us be and we'll mind our own business, right? So we always have Jews have been very strong in our faith. However, I think that within our own circles, we might have had some insecurities. And we were afraid to question some of those values because you ask too many questions, you never know where they're going to be, where they're going to lead to. You never want to ask a question that you don't know the answer to. But I can tell you this, that the meaning of the word Chabad is an acronym. Chabad is not a denomination of Judaism. It is an approach to faith. Chabad is an intellectual approach to faith. It's an acronym for Chochmah Bina Dat, which means idea, understanding, and personalization. It's a process of assimilating an intellectual concept. Chabad is to rationalize faith. That's what it means. We're constantly pushing the envelope. And like you said, Al, faith begins where intellect ends. When I finish understanding, that's when my faith begins. It's easy to have faith when everything makes sense, right? Faith is what you need when it doesn't make sense. When you don't understand why God is doing whatever he's doing, right? That's why we wear the yarmulke, representing our faith in something higher, above our brains. Where the brain ends, that's where faith begins, right? So Chabad is an unapologetic and relentless intellectual attack on faith. Where do we get this idea from? It comes from the Zohar, which is the founding text of the Kabbalah, right there on the screen. Understanding God to the extent possible is the purpose of our being. This is core Jewish spirituality. We are not afraid of challenging our presumptions, our presuppositions. We are supposed to challenge our faith. And that's why, David, I'm glad I'm with your rabbis that encourage you to question. That's good. Way to go. And I think a lot of our fellow Jews today, Palm Beach Gardens, have been painfully disenfranchised from Judaism because 60, 70, 80 years ago, their teachers did not allow them to question. And there was a generation shift at play. They were asking questions they needed answers to, and the teachers refused to give it to them. It doesn't work like that anymore. Thank God we've caught up. But this idea was actually quoted in the book of Tanya. I want you to see it in your actual text. If you look to text number 2, page 4, the book of Tanya is a foundational text of the book of Chabad philosophy, written by the Alter Rebbe, quoting from the Zohar. Take a look. Here's what he says, is one of my favorite quotes from Tanya. It's at the very end of chapter 44. The entirety, so it's text 2, page 4. The entirety of human existence and purpose is to gain intimate knowledge of God's glory and majestic splendor. Each individual to the extent of their intellectual capacity. This goal is stated in the Zohar, quoted on the screen. God created the world in order that they may know him. Him. What was that about him?
No, I'm just.
She's answering the question of whether God was.
Gender. Oh, yeah, we're going to get to gender today. Yeah, absolutely. I'm not letting that one go. So yeah, God wants a relationship with us. He wants us to know him. Yes, Phyllis.
I have the feeling that a lot of those rabbis and teachers who I didn't have to get him, but he was a child, but many of them had no answer. Is when you ask a question and the professional has an answer for you, they turn it around and they'll say to you, you can't ask me that question. If you have dealt with your faith and the question that is required, then you're not so afraid of somebody else.
So you're saying that maybe they didn't let us ask questions because they didn't know the answers. I want to tell you, my parents' generation and many of your parents' generations grew up with survival in their minds. You know, my father grew up 50 yards from the border of Jordan, which today is, you know, the Dan Pearl Hotel, the David Citadel, the Mamilla Hotel. He grew up just 50 yards from there. That was Jordan. He was throwing rocks at Jordanian kids, and soldiers. I mean, whatever, they're at each other, And this was painful existence. I don't think they had the luxury of being able to ponder the ideas that we have time to ponder today. Good point. So the idea here is that God, and we've discussed this idea before, it's going to come up in this course, but just to touch on an idea, we've discussed the idea that the purpose of our existence is that God wants a relationship with us. He wants us to build for him a home in this world. Where do we build a home for God? You build a shul on PGA Boulevard. Lovely. So God has a home in PGA. It's nice. God wants a home in your house as well, right? In your kitchen, your living room, your library, your bedroom, right? This is where we created a home for God in this world. But you know what the most precious piece of real estate upon the face of this earth is? Where is the most expensive piece of real estate on the face of this earth? It's right here and right here. You can pay money for the Empire State Building, but for someone's heart and mind, I don't know. Your heart and mind, probably priceless. When we question, we're serving God not only with our yarmulke, with our faith, but with our brain and with our heart, when it makes sense to us, this magnificent idea. And that's why you'll find in the earliest work of Jewish theology, which is called Emunas V'Deos, written by the 10th century sage Saadia Gaon, he actually gives us two reasons straight up as to why we should challenge our faith. Take a look at text number 3 on page 5, where he says, we engage in philosophic and intellectual probes of the principles of our faith for two reasons. Number one, to intellectually confirm that which we already know, having been so informed by God's prophets. In other words, we want to be able to confirm what we know on a faith level. We want to confirm it intellectually, that it makes sense to our brain as well. And number two, second, to empower ourselves to respond to those who take issue with our beliefs. You got to be able to be ready for the heretics, right? You got to know what to answer. So here on the screen, number one, to create a harmonious relationship with God, in which our soul and mind work in tandem. And number two, we said, is to equip ourselves with responses in the event that we're challenged. Many of our ancestors lived in the shtetl. The girls certainly couldn't afford an education. And lucky were the boys that could get an education. These guys are bubbies and zaydis that were minding their own business. The cobbler, the grave digger, the butcher. Came a skilled priest to town. And he would really, really succeed in playing with their minds. This was a real issue. Today, you got the internet, you got everything available. Information is available everywhere at any time. But in those days, it wasn't that easy finding information. So when you had somebody that was equipped with answers, it was powerful. It's amazing. It's like, when you watch somebody that expresses your political views on a debate or television or something. You're like, yeah, you go, you say it like it is. You tell them what they need to hear, right? So that's why, not only from a scientific and natural perspective, but even from a Jewish spiritual perspective, we need to ask questions in order to be able to find inner healthy balance on an internal level, not just in our outward behavior. So we can summarize this. A summary of what we just spoke about is on page 6, figure 1.1, which explains the human reason to question our faith, as well as the Jewish reason to question our faith. And as mentioned, in today's discussion, we're going to cover 4 rapid fire topics. Number 1, what is God? Number 2, where is God? Number 3, who created God? And finally, is God a he or a she? All right. All these questions are coming from a place of love. They're coming from a place of health. We're not asking questions because of a tragedy. There are people that ask questions because of a tragedy. But today, we're not here because we're bereaved, thank God. We're here because we're healthy. We're here because we're strong. We're asking questions because we're looking to deepen our relationship with God, to improve our own inner health, our inner stability, and to improve our spirituality. Yes, Ken?
Doesn't it depend on who you ask the question?
What depend?
From what authority do you ask the question? Do you ask the question from an Orthodox person or a Reformed person? You understand what I'm saying?
Well, you've always got to consider the source, my friend. If you're going to ask a question on Google, brace yourself for a lot of mishigas out there. You know what I mean? It always depends on who you're asking the question to. We were having a conversation just yesterday where somebody quoted something about something which he apparently heard from somebody else. And we know that the whole thing was the Baba Maisa from the very beginning, right? There's a lot more Baba Maisa out there than Maisa.
You have to know who you're asking the question.
Absolutely. It's like what you do with your money. You just give it to any financial planner on Google, or you turn to someone that you know, right? Someone you trust. It's a doctor, right? Your rabbi is also got to be someone that you know, that you trust, that you believe in, to be able to guide you with the right answers. Okay, good. So let's start over that very first question today, which is, what is God? You know, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev was the mechutin. You know what a mechutin is? A mechutin? When two couples, and like in-laws, there's no word for this in English. When two kids marry, when husband and wife marry each other, then their parents are mechutans to each other. Machutanim, that's how you say it in English. Okay, machutanim, got it. Okay, with a K, right? Machutanim, good. So, so the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, was a mechutan with Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev. Their kids married each other. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev once met a heretic. This heretic used to love to share his lack of faith with anybody that would want to hear, asking all of his questions and his brilliant insights to anyone that would care to listen to him. At one point, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak said to this guy, to the heretic, to the atheist, and this is a line I have to admit I borrowed from Rabbi Levi. This is 250 years ago. He says, you know, you're right. The God that you don't believe in, I don't believe in either. The God that you deny, I also deny. Because your concept of God is not nearly my concept of God. If you're thinking of God as some sort of jealous, insecure cop in the sky that cares about every time I step out of line and he's only waiting with vengeance to zap me into oblivion. And by the way, he also is very forgetful, which is why I have to pray to him 3 times a day, every day, and he still doesn't deliver, right? You know, CNN came to the Western Wall. They made a story in Israel after 50 years of conquering the Western Wall, after the 6-Day War. And they saw a Jew there who's been praying at the Western Wall 3 times a day for 50 years. My father fought in the 6-Day War, he remembers this. So they interviewed him, they said, what do you pray for? He says, I come here to pray for peace in the Middle East. 3 times a day for 50 years. And how do you feel after 50 years of praying for that here at the Western Wall? He says, I feel like I'm talking to a wall. Yes, Rosa.
Yeah, when someone says, I'm spiritual, what is it? Does it mean that they believe in God? To me, it doesn't mean that.
That's a very interesting question. We're going to talk about that right now, where here's what I believe. I believe that what they're doing is they're expressing what Dr. Lisa Miller said moments ago. They're searching for a higher purpose. They're searching for a higher purpose, but they're not quite sure what it is. We'll discuss, we'll get to it in just a moment.
Okay.
We'll get to it in just a moment. So Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev says that the God that you deny, I also deny. The God that you don't believe in, I also don't believe in. Let me introduce you to my God, because before we can know God, we've got to unlearn the misconceptions that we've been falsely fed. Our forefather Abraham is the one that introduced us to the idea of an almighty, invisible, all-powerful God. He did so in last week's Torah portion called Lech Lecha, which means go out. Why is the portion called leave, go out, depart? Because in order to maintain, to approach a relationship with God, you need to get out of your box. You need to leave your prejudice, leave your preconceptions, and be truly open to a new idea entirely. Let's take a look at this idea here in this short video.
So, you want to know more about God? Let's start with your current conception of God. Is he a big mighty guy in the sky, tugging at the puppet strings of the universe? Does he spend his days golfing with the righteous on lush heaven greens? Is he angry and vengeful? or wise and kind? We all have conceptions of God picked up along our developing years. But before we delve into secrets of God's being, we need to do some inner household cleaning. You see, thousands of years ago, young Abraham had a similar problem. At the time, people were searching for coherence in a universe that seemed random. So they devised an elaborate system of multiple powers, who each were responsible for a different function. If you got the rain god happy, you got more rain. If the sun god was pleased, you got more sun for your crops. Then the wise men decided that each god was associated with a figure and shape, an idol that you could conveniently buy from your local idol shop. And these figurines had the power to grant or deny your deepest needs and wishes. Abraham's father Terah had just such a shop, and he made the mistake of asking Abraham to man the sales floor for a day. An old woman walked in. "Young man, an idol, please, for my arthritis. Which of these gods is good for my knees?" "How old are you?" Abraham asked. 60, replied the woman. "You poor thing," Abraham said. 60 years old and bowing down to an object that was made yesterday. Embarrassed, the woman slinked away. Next, a woman came in with a plate filled with fine flour. "Take this, young man, and offer it to the idols." But Abraham had a different idea. He took a club and smashed all the idols. He then put the club in the hand of the largest idol. When Terah came to the store, he was furious. "What have you done to the idols?" "I must be honest with you," Abraham responded. "A woman came with a plate of fine flour and asked me to offer it to them. When I set it before them, one of the idols exclaimed, 'I'm starving. I will eat first.' Another quickly protested, 'No, I will eat first.' That started a huge fight. What a scene! The largest idol then stood up, grabbed that club, and smashed the rest of them. "Are you mocking me?" Terah shouted. "Do the idols have any awareness?" Abraham smiled. "Exactly." Abraham went on to teach people what God is not. Before humanity could begin to know what God is, they had to unlearn their crooked conception of him. We are not so different from school or from home or from Hollywood. We ingest portraits of God that stay stuck in stone, not growing with us as we mature and our intelligence blossoms. If and when we decide we want to expand our understanding of God, we must first do what Abraham did. We have to unlearn before we learn. Before constructing God, we need to deconstruct.
We too need to go through a similar process in our personal quest to deconstruct our false perceptions of God before we can construct our new perception of God. What does this mean? We know God has an amazing name. Let's take a look at a magnificent text that explains to us the meaning of one of the most frequently used names of God that will give us so much to meditate upon in our new broadened horizon as we approach the understanding of what is God. Anybody know a name of God that comes to mind? What are the names of God that you know? Hashem, what else? Anybody, anything else? Okay, that's a name which we're not allowed to actually pronounce out of context, but that's right. Okay, good. Anything else? Another one, good. Another holy name. Hashem means the name, by the way. Hashem just means that guy, the one who shall not be mentioned. You know, that's kind of what we're saying. Hashem, the name. Out of holy, any other names come to mind? There's a lot of names. Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Anybody heard of that name? Kadosh means like Kiddush or Kaddish. Kadosh means holy. The Holy One, blessed be He. Have you heard of that term? The Holy One, blessed be He. Hakadosh Baruch Hu is one of the most earliest names of God that we know about. Let's analyze this beautiful name of God, which tells us so much about the part of God that we don't actually know anything about. So let's take a look at this text number 5. Text number 5 is on page 10. This comes from the Maharal of Prague. Maharal of Prague lived in Prague. He was the creator of the Golem of Prague, the Kabbalistic humanoid that protected the Jewish people from the brutal persecution of the blood libels in the 1500s. He was the 7th generation ancestor of the Alter Rebbe. He was also my 15th grandfather, 15 generations ago. Rabbi Yehuda Low, the Maharal of Prague, here's what he says. This is a classic. Text 5, page 10. Our sages purposely refer to God as Kadosh, the Holy One, because God's truest self is unknowable, detached from and beyond every form of physicality, body, or any other existing entity. It is therefore appropriate to refer to God as the Holy One, for the term Kadosh is used for an entity that is removed. The word Kadosh means holy, right? But what does holy mean? Holy means designated, separated, apart. When we marry, it's called kiddushin, because this woman now is separated from all other men. She's now designated. That's called kadosh. When something is holy, it's kadosh. It's separated. It's not for everybody to handle, to touch. It's now special. So when we call God kadosh, what we're saying is that God is unknowable, detached from and beyond every form of physicality, body, or any other existing entity. Our sages, in their great wisdom, informed us of this truth through referring to God as HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He, implying that God is simple. Now, the word simple here means not defined. It means He is essential. It means He's all-powerful, not defined as blue or black or tall or short, that He's got everything within Him, simple, and transcends all that exists. They intentionally chose a negative term to refer to God, which does not identify what He is, but rather denotes that He transcends all that exists. This is a very deep piece. This piece is essentially telling us that the name of God tells us what God is not, and not telling us what God is. Why is it not telling us what God is? Because you can't know. Because God is almighty, infinite, and all-powerful. If you start to say that He's yellow or rich or Republican, then you're defining Him. That's a bastardization of what He is. We can only tell you that He's not defined by anything that you know. So it's an approach towards our ability to fathom the greatness of God. The idea of understanding that God is so much greater than anything that we can relate to. It's not like saying, well, God is like the president of the United States of America. No, God is maybe like the Tsar of Russia. It's not, you can't say that, because God is so much more powerful than anything that we could relate to. You know, when we look at the James Webb telescope that's giving us images of light years, 5,600 light years away from us, and you realize that the vastness of the universe is something so much greater than we ever dreamed, comprehended, fathomed. You realize that whoever created this is incredibly powerful. Yes, Keith. Oh, you just agree. Okay, good. So what we're saying here is that by saying that God is simple, we're saying that He's beyond any definition. Now, that's my kind of God. A God that is not angry or happy, big or small, rich or poor, defined in any way. A God that is truly almighty, truly all-powerful. That is a God that is simple and not defined, not in a negative way simple, but when we say simple, it means free of any form of definition. You know, imagine 3 or 4 blind men. 4 blind men approach an elephant. You know, in Africa, there's a place called Daisna. South Africa, you can go and feed the elephants. It's fantastic. They eat whole apples, whole oranges, watermelons. You give them a whole watermelon. So you have 4 blind men feeling an elephant. And one guy feels the trunk, and what does he say? I think this is a snake. Another guy feels the side of the elephant, and I think it's a wall. The third guy feels the tail, and he says it's got to be a rope. Another one feels the leg, and he says, no, this is a column. It's a pillar. I can feel it. It's a pillar. Is anybody here wrong? They're all technically correct with their little small-minded analyses. But what they all have in common is that they're all missing the bigger picture. So we in our relationship with God can say, yes, God is kind, wise, generous, whatever you want to say that God is. But all of that is missing the bigger picture, which is what this text number 5 is all about. HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He is distinct, separate, removed, far from any possible definition that we might ever be able to encounter. Now, what's fascinating is that, here it is, here's the name of God on the screen, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He, which means that He's detached from every form of physicality. Okay, now, what's interesting is that we know that God created man in His image. He tells us that in the Torah. What's quite interesting is that we seem to have returned the favor, where we too have created God in man's image. In our minds, we have created a God that has human properties or characteristics. And that, of course, is applying human failure and imperfection to God. That's what Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berditcher was saying. The God that you deny, I also deny. We need to ensure that we're not making the same mistake. I encounter people all the time that say, I cannot believe in a God that would have done X, Y, and Z. Now, I say to them, I mean, with sensitivity, I say, look, you know, you're implying that God is an entity that you can understand, right? That's what you're saying. That if it doesn't make sense to you, if his behavior doesn't make sense to you, therefore he doesn't exist because it should make sense to you. What you're essentially saying is that you and God are equivalents, like buddies living in the same street, right? I didn't understand lots of things that Barack Obama did. I didn't understand lots of things that Donald Trump did, but guess what? They still existed, even though I don't understand them. Doesn't matter, right? It doesn't mean that someone doesn't exist just because I don't understand them. So you might disagree with certain behaviors. That's okay. It's okay. And this is very sensitive and very emotional and very painful for us to encounter personal tragedy, crisis, catastrophe, and things that we can encounter in this course. But we have to be able to recognize that God is almighty and simple from removed from any definition, so that when we impose I would never be friends with such a person. Okay, that's fine. But it doesn't mean that God doesn't exist because you don't understand it, right? You know, one of the biggest minds of our century he was given that moniker by Time magazine, Rabbi Steinsaltz, Sadin Evan Yisrael Steinsaltz. That was his name. He lived in Jerusalem. He was the first one to translate the Talmud. Brilliant mind. He passed away during COVID. He writes that this idea is the reason for idolatry. It's a core motivation for idolatry. That we human beings have this deep-rooted need to be able to find spirituality. We're seeking spirituality, especially Jews are very much seeking spirituality. And that's why we're at the forefront of all sorts of movements and isms and nationalistic movements and culture and arts. We're always looking to go beyond our little world. We're looking to add more meaning, more purpose, more color, more value into our lives because of this deep-rooted need for spirituality. But at the same time, the reason that we turn to idolatry, to the image we saw on the screen before with Abraham and the idols, is because we're desperate to define God. We're desperately seeking to define God. But God is by definition undefinable. Let's take a look at these words from Adin Steinsaltz. So page 10, 6a, text 6a. Defining idolatry. He says, one of the special things about the Jews is a certain mental quality that undoubtedly exists in other nations, but is more predominant amongst us. And this is the inclination toward idolatry. Jews have always struggled with idolatry. If you read the prophets, you'll see. It's not easy to define idolatry because this term applies to a broad range of things. In the more general sense, idolatry is not specifically the presence of real and concrete statues or as the multiplicity of gods, but the creation of what the Bible calls other gods. That is, idolatry is the turning of some entity, as it were, into a supreme goal, into a god. How many Jews you know turn their religion, their politics into their religion?
Yeah.
Right? See what I'm saying? You can't argue with them. There's no negotiating with them about their politics. It's non-negotiable. It's like their religion. It's faith. This is the most abstract and superior aspect of idolatry. But this, like the material cult of idols, is in complete contradiction to the essential faith in one God. What they're trying to do is to create a sense of spirituality, of purpose and values without God. They're trying to define God into their little box, in their image, and that's where it becomes idolatrous. And he continues on the next page, page 11, text 6b. Rabbi Steinsaltz explains that belief in God includes from the start, beginning with the 10 Commandments, two components that everyone finds difficult to grasp and to identify with. The first is the perception of God as the one and only, who is therefore all-embracing and all-supreme, divine, above all comprehension, and therefore far above any personal relationship with something defined and specific. When we say the first commandment, I am one God, it means everything's a part of God. So God is above all comprehension and definition. This is a very ethereal and abstract concept. To this is compounded another difficulty, which is a faith that is entirely an abstraction, which doesn't allow any image, form, or other experience that can be grasped. You'll never find an image of God in a Jewish synagogue. There's no physical representations of God in a shul. You know, the Jewish kid that went to Catholic school, he couldn't behave. You know the story. He couldn't behave. His parents had given up on him. They sent him to a Catholic school that had a good reputation. On day one, he goes straight, doing his homework, obedient, yes, sir, no, sir. And the parents don't know what happened. They can't understand what happened. When they see his report card, everything's straight A's. They sit him down. They're like, kid, what did they do to you in that school? I mean, we're very proud, but what's going on? He said, Mom, Dad, listen. The minute I set foot in that school and I saw what they did to that poor kid when they nailed him to the plus sign, I knew these guys mean business. So you will never find that, of course, in a shul. There's no manifestations of divinity. There's no physical representations. The early Christians were Jews who were struggling to concretize their faith. Think about that. And that's why they said, well, there's a person that you can turn to, right? And then this is idolatry through the ages because we've desperately sought some sort of manifestation that's a little more concrete than an abstract and invisible and ethereal and non-understandable and impossible to define God. Can you give me something to work with, right? Thank God we have a Torah that we can at least point towards the Torah, right? Idolatry, continue, we're going to finish this piece here. Idolatry in all its forms destroys this unity and replaces it with entities. We define God, whether few or many that can all be defined and grasped. Idolatry is an attempt of simple people to give some kind of form to the divine image, with which they could then develop a closer and more concrete type of relationship. The temptation to identify with and serve something that can be understood, recognized, and to some extent felt and sensed is very great. So Razan, this really is the answer to your question. They're trying to create a spirituality with some sort of a tangible form. And we do this all the time. We're all guilty of idolatry, every one of us. It's easy for us to point fingers at Abrahamic times and people that worship stones. But how many people do you know that worship Mercedes-Benz or their cars or their homes or their country clubs or their political values? Yeah. Which one? Or their art, right? People that worship their social status, their tax bracket, their yacht, right? So they're trying to give a physical manifestation to their values. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So people that say that they're spiritual, they don't go to temple. Wouldn't you say that's true?
I think there's many people that are spiritual that don't go to temple. Now, what I'm saying over here is like this. Look, I'm going to say it straight up.
They don't say they're Jewish.
There's a reason. Look, let me put it to you straight up. There's a reason why human beings want to be spiritual. The reason is because we have a soul. We have a soul, which is spiritual. So we want to manifest that. Like you want to eat food because you have a physical digestive system. You have a spiritual digestive system, which requires you to engage in spirituality. But you'll never satiate that desire until you plumb the depths of the definition of that soul, which is a piece of God. When we realize and accept and make peace with the fact that our soul is a piece of God, and we confront God not as a controlling being that's outside of us, but God as a piece of us, as an organic connection to us, that's when we're going to find peace, and satisfaction. So I am saying, and this might sound a little dogmatic, I apologize if I am, that that perhaps those people that are seeking spirituality void of God are barking up the wrong tree. I'm sure we can argue about this.
No.
But that's my position.
I bring this up because I'm on Match. And people that write to me say they're spiritual, others that write say they're Jewish. But that's why I wanted to.
I take it as a compliment. I think it's a wonderful thing to be spiritual. They're looking for more. You know, when flower power was happening in the 60s,
Right.
the Rabbi very much encouraged it. He said, these people are looking for something more.
Yeah.
This might not be politically correct, but I think the whole woke movement is pretty cool on a deep-rooted level. Because I think that we're living in times and a culture today where people are seeking to reinterpret their values. Maybe I'm not male, maybe I'm not female. I don't know, maybe know that much about woke, but I'm thinking that they're looking to.
Don't go there.
Maybe I shouldn't go there, but yeah, I might be putting my foot in my mouth. Admittedly, I probably should stop right now. But let me just conclude and say that the idea of searching for something more in itself, without politicizing that statement,
Right.
is actually a healthy seeking of our soul within.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that's what I want to say. Good.
Great.
So that is where I want to leave it for now, where we crave spirituality as human beings, but we struggle with its abstraction. And therefore, when we want to answer our question about God, we'll say that God is beyond our perception entirely. God is essentially unknowable. We can know things about him, but not his essence. We cannot face his essence. Right? This is what we struggle with. That's why Jews have always been at the forefront of all sorts of idols for the best of reasons. This here. So in summary, what is God? We don't know what is God. We can only understand things about him. And that is our first step towards deconstruction today, so that we can now begin the construction. We got 3 more great questions to deal with. I want to make sure we have time for them. Phyllis, go ahead.
Just quickly, several years ago, number of years ago, there was a movement that started by the church, and it said, "What would Jesus do?" We've never tried to say what would God do, although I guess we don't really know. So that was a way to really take a figure like Jesus, make him comprehensible, make him able for us to imitate him. And I just thought that was incredible. I always wondered why we couldn't come up with.
Look, I think that's a bit of an emotionally charged question because, I mean, with respect, I mean, Jesus is are you talking about him in context as a deity or as a human being? I don't want to even go there right now because I think it's going to be off the tracks right now where we're going. So with respect, I'm going to pull it back in. I want to make sure we can cover our questions. So our first question was, what is God? The answer is that we cannot answer this question because the minute that you're starting to define God with respect, you're not talking about my God anymore. There's a great story of 2 Hasidim that were debating. They were talking about God's essence. We learn about this idea in the study of Chabad Hasidus. And one said to the other, please give me a description of what God's essence is like. And the guy was like, well, you crazy? I can't describe God's essence. Like, no, but just give me some description. I can't give you a description of God's essence because it's essentially undefinable. He begged and he pleaded. Eventually the guy started saying, okay. God's essence is, and as he started saying the first thing, the guy gave him a patchin pun him. Frask across the face, right? So what was that for? He said, I just wanted to make sure that you really understood that you really, really, really cannot define God's essence. You can only talk about him. It was an educational moment there. You can talk about him, but you can't ever truly describe or experience him because the moment you're describing infinity, you've lost infinity. It's not almighty. It's not all powerful. So our next question is a little lower. The next 3 questions are going to be a lot easier to deal with. This is very abstract and ethereal, that one, but it was an important one for us to recognize and embrace that idea of open-mindedness, of deconstruction. Where is God? Anybody know? Where is God? What do you think?
Everywhere.
Anywhere else? Inside of you? Anywhere else? Up on the bima? Oh, that's idolatry. Okay, anywhere else? Anywhere else, guys? There's a great story. These 2 kids were the mischievous boys of town, of the shtetl. Their mom could not know, they had no idea what to do with them anymore. Especially she hears one day that a big disciplinarian rabbi is in the shtetl. So she brings the boys to him. Maybe he'll set them straight. One at a time, says the rabbi. Okay. So they're waiting in the office and in the waiting room. The first boy goes in by himself. The rabbi stands up, towers over him. 6'5", towers over this little boy, 8-year-old. And he says, tell me, where is God? The boy looks up and he's terrified. He doesn't say a word. Where is God? The rabbi bellows. The boy started to turn white. When the rabbi bellows the third time, where is God? He quickly turns green and purple and he bolts out the door, runs into the waiting room and into the closet. His brother comes over and says, what happened in there? How did he do this to you? The boy's shaking. He says, brother, now we're in deep trouble. God is missing and they think we did it. So where is God? We've got an answer here. God is everywhere. That's nice. Hashem is here. Hashem is there. Hashem is truly everywhere. What? I was waiting for somebody to say God is in heaven. It's today's Torah reading. Point from the heavens. God is, of course, in heaven. You ever heard of the expression Oiberster? Oiberster. Anybody heard of that term Oiberster, which is Yiddish? It means the one above. Right? The one above. That's how we talk about God. The one above. By the way, when we say the words the one above, I want you to think about this for a moment. What do we mean by that name of God, the one above? We're saying above what? Above our ability to comprehend. He's higher. Whatever you understand, he's higher. You think you got him? You don't. He's infinite. He's almighty. He's beyond your capacity to define, right? You think you defined him? You lost him, right? Oibishter. So the name Oibishter means the one above, right? We talk about Yiras Shamayim, which translates, bad translation, is fear of heaven. Right? We're supposed to be afraid of heaven somehow, right? We talk about Avinu Shebashamayim, our Father in heaven. So here we got a bit of a conflict, because on the one hand, we know that God is everywhere. At the same time, we know that God is above, right? Take a look at text number 8. We hear it says from Isaiah, holy, holy, holy is the God of the heavenly hosts. The entire world is filled with his glory, right? So we know that he's everywhere in text number 8. But if you look in text number 7, gaze down from the heavens, your holy dwelling place, and bless your people Israel. Then we read that a couple weeks ago in the Torah. So where is he? What is this, the quantum mechanics? Is he everywhere and in heaven at the same time? Can we make up our minds? Like where is he? The problem with saying that God is everywhere, the problem with both these answers is that the minute you're going to get into this, you're already violating rule number 1 that we learned in the previous question. You're already defining God. Think about it. If God is in heaven, it means that he's not here. So you just right there, just define it. Right there, you got your X on, right? You're out. Right? And if you're going to say that God is everywhere, that's also limiting. Why is that limiting? Because he's only where space is, where there's space. It's a little abstract, this idea. But he's only where there is space, which means that he's inside the world. He's everywhere in the world, but he's in the world. Right? Sorry. So let me show it to you on the screen. There it is. It limits God because it confines God to a created space. Like he's here, but he's not where, in a place that is not yet being created. And that's why we discover a third name of God, another name of God. You know the blessing that we say to the mourners? Anybody remember what that is? We say that may the Almighty comfort you amongst the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. How do we refer to God as Almighty? Hamakom yenachem etchem. Hamakom means the place. May the space comfort you amongst the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. Isn't that an interesting name of God? This space? How cool is that for a name? Space, right? So you're saying that, here it is on the screen, makom, which means space. That's the name that we use to describe in God, right? Now, why would we use that term to describe God? I want you to meditate upon this next piece, text number 9, as it's explained in the Medrash, in the oral Torah. Why is he called the space? Because God is the space of the universe. The universe is not the space of God. Wow. When you say that God is everywhere, you're saying that God is everywhere where there is space. That's the limitation. But when you say that God is space, you're saying that everything is within God, not that God is in everything. Are you agreeing with me or disagreeing?
I'm disagreeing with the concept that about how you're describing everywhere. Because for me,
Okay.
my concept is that if God is everything, everywhere, everything is within God. And everywhere is within God.
Okay, so David, so you're actually at the answer. So you're agreeing with my answer, with the conclusion, not with the question, right? You're defining a deeper interpretation of what it means that God is everywhere. I would say that on a superficial interpretation, God is everywhere. God is at that table. He's in the kitchen, and he's in the office, and he's in your house in Mirasol, right? So we're like, okay, we've got predefined spaces. This is not a superficial perception. We're saying God is in all these predefined spaces. But would God be in a space that's not predefined? I don't know. That's why we need the third name of God, Hamakom, which tells you this space. God is this space. Everything exists within him, not that he exists within the space. You gonna say something, Keith? I can't hear you. What?
God's in everything, molecules in space, but then when we start defining it, we keep, molecules broken up into smaller things. You can't define that. We'll never know what the answer is. I like what you said where everything, all the space is in the balance. You can't really define what that space is.
Right. Okay, that's good. So God is the space of which contains everything. It's interesting. We look at the macro. The planets and the three pillars that the James Webb Telescope just discovered. What I find more fascinating is the nano. Is when you go into a cell and you find the subatomic particles that exist within us. Scientists cannot explain why electrons are constantly in motion. Where do they get this energy from? Where do they get the energy to constantly move and not stop? We have a nuclear physicist in our community. I discussed it with him. He's from Harvard. And I asked him, would it be fair to say that this is the Michelangelo's finger of God in the Sistine Chapel, where God meets creator, where the infinite movement of the electron or the unstopping movement of the electron, nothing always moves forever, is perhaps God's ever-presence within every particle of existence. He thought that was a great way to look at it. But I don't want to get sidetracked. That's a great discussion over there. At least we're holding in a place now where we say, where is God? Everywhere is in God. And therefore, we can say the following. We can say like this. Why do we say that God is in the heavens? Because when we're talking about God as transcendent, that's when we say God is above. When we say God is above our ability to understand. Why did God bring the Holocaust? He's in the heavens. Why did he allow that to happen to the child? He's above. I don't know the answer. I'm not God's defense attorney. I'm not him. If I was him, I probably would know the answer. But God is above our ability to comprehend. That's when we speak about God as in the heavens.
Can you hear me?
Of course he can hear you. But we'll get to that in one of the questions coming. When we say that God is everywhere, now we're saying that God is relatable. Now we're saying that God is relatable. God is personal. That's what we mean when we say that God is everywhere. But there's one more step just before you point there, Leah. I want to say. So when we say in the heavens, it's that God is beyond us. When we say everywhere, it's an attempt to see the expression of God everywhere. But Rabbi Nachum Mendel of Kotsk was a famous Hasidic Rebbe. He once asked his students, where is God? And they said, what do you mean, where is God? He's everywhere. And Rabbi Nachum Mendel of Kotsk said, God is wherever you let him in. Right? God is wherever you let him in. And that's beautiful. It's beautiful to be able to take in the heavens and everywhere to a deeply personal level, to be able to say that, of course, God hears me. God is within me. The question is, God hears me. The question is, do I hear him? He sees me. The question is, do I see him? Do I let him in? Do you feel the presence of God in your personal fears and your personal struggles and crises and catastrophes and your doctor's calls? Do you feel the presence of God there? Do you let him in? There, that's the question that we're left with. Leah.
I was just going to say, if you thought of God as infinity, and infinity has no ending, then there's no ending to space. And then I think that's what God is.
Where? Everywhere?
Everywhere is infinity.
It's hard to relate to it, but it's very hard to relate to infinity, though.
Yeah, but when you say everywhere, it's like you said, everywhere is space.
Right. So you're agreeing with David that it's a deeper interpretation of everywhere. I like that. Beautiful. Ayet.
Everywhere. Where
Is defining.
artifact, material thing.
Yes.
To get like really nano, it's still stuff.
Yes.
And God, I think, is out.
It's very limiting to say that. Yeah.
Like, if you don't know what form exists outside of material.
Beautiful. Either way, I think we're all in agreement with the conclusion, right? That when we talk about where is God, we can now close our second question. Again, we're moving rapid fire here. We're going to be covering 25 questions, right? Through the seminar. Today, just 4. So where is God? The answer is so beautiful to meditate upon. This space. God is the space of everything. Everything is within him, not that he's in anything else. He is the very fabric of existence, yet he's also deeply personal. He's in the heavens and he's everywhere in the sense that I too can have a personal connection and relationship with God. Okay, let's go to the next question. Number 3 of 4 today. How did God come to be? Now, this is a good question. You're going to date. What's the first thing you want to know with the person you're dating? Where do you come from? Where were you raised? Who are your parents? Right? Those are kind of questions. I meet people all the time. Tell me about your siblings. You tell me about your siblings. I know a lot about you right there, right? There's so much to learn from people where they come from. You want to get to know God. That's fascinating. You want to get to know where he comes from. It's a good question. There's compelling arguments for the existence of the Creator. You know, there's a famous anecdote by Stephen Hawking in his book, A Brief History of Time. He talks about a lecture by an astronomy professor, talks about the incredible details of the solar system and all the galaxies, everything else. When a woman at the back of the hall pipes up and she says, sir, you're talking rubbish, because the universe is actually just a flat plate on the back of a giant turtle. So not wanting to insult her simplicity, Stephen Hawking continues. I don't think he invented this because I researched it. It really has deep origins, this analogy. And he says to her, well, okay, let's say we're a flat plate on the back of a giant turtle, but what's the giant turtle sitting on? Ha, she says, on a bigger turtle, obviously, right on the back of a bigger turtle. Okay, well, what's that turtle on? He's trying to broaden her horizons. And then eventually she says, it's no use, sir. It's turtles all the way down. Right? Which is ridiculous. It's literally kicking the can down the road to say that it's turtles all the way down, right? So where do we come from? Just turtles all the way to the very beginning. There's got to be a first turtle somewhere, right? But if you just keep with that logic, then you're just ignoring the question, really. You're just saying time's up, so I'm not going to answer the question. We've got to be able to introduce, and this is what Stephen's argument is, we've got to be able to introduce a founding cause at the very beginning. And that is where the Torah introduces us to the idea of what God is. God is essentially different, in his essence, different to everything else that exists. we advance by realizing that the creator isn't an effect at all, and so it requires no cause at all. Everything else that exists outside, beyond God, is an effect of a prior cause. But God is the primordial cause, which has no cause that preceded it. That's what defines God as an oxymoron. But that is what makes God God. By being the primordial cause, by being the very beginning of the essence of life. What do we say about Torah? Eitz chayim hi lamachazikim. By the Torah is a tree of life to those who grasp onto it. You hold Torah, you connected, you plugged into God, you plugged into power. Anything else, death. It's not life. Only God is the essence of life. Everything else is the absence of life. So Maimonides, we put this out nicely for you in a little chart on page 15, where you can see, no, not 15, sorry, page further, 16, where we've charted out two classic Jewish philosophers, Maimonides and Rabbi Yosef Albo, the book of fundamental beliefs. And they chart out the difference between everything and God and everything else. So if you look at it here, these are powerful terms to meditate upon on page 16. Everything is an entity that exists. Page 16, figure 1.3. But God, I'm on the first line, everything is an entity that exists, but God is an existence unlike any other form of existence, just different. On the second line, and this is the key, everything is a contingent existence. It's an existence that relies on something else. Like I rely on my parents. If not for my parents, I wouldn't be here. But God is what's called mechuyav hametzias, which means the essence of existence. The core, the origin, or necessary. And necessary is not a good translation. The Hebrew is so much richer. Mechuyav hametzias means essentially existing. He's not contingently existing. He's essentially existing. Where in the third line, everything else is dependent upon something else, dependent existence. God is the only independent existence. This is really what we mean when we sing Adon Olam Asher Malach B'Terem Kol Yetzur Nivra. Those words, master of the universe, I'm just translating, master of the universe, who ruled before anything else was created. Because he created it. If you read Adon Olam in English, it's magnificent. Adon Olam really outlines this idea that God is the rock, the core, the origin of life.
Who said so?
Said what?
Who said that?
Well, okay, so the Torah tells us this idea. Oh, I'll tell you who tells us this. I'll tell you who tells us this. It's on his business card. I'm serious. It's on God's business card. Let me prove it to you. When did God show us his business card? Who was what? Mount Sinai. Who was the first one to meet God at Mount Sinai? It was Moses at the burning bush. So Moses is trying to mind his own business. He's chasing after the sheep, sees this bush, and God says, "Hi, I'm the God of the fathers. Okay, I'm going to take you guys out of Egypt." He's like, "Okay, that's interesting. Go and tell the Jews that we're going to go out of Egypt." So what does Moses say? He says, "Can you tell me what your name is? Like, what am I going to tell them? Who sent me here? Who sent me? Tell me, what is your name?" Right? That's what he says. Take a look, text number 17. Look at this. Moses said to God, "When I come to the children of Israel and inform them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, they will respond, what is his name?" What should I tell them? They can ask me, what is his name? Now, they're not asking, what is his name? Like my dog is called Charlie, that I needed to have a name. Your name indicates your essence. Your name is expressive of your truth. A Hebrew name is not just a table means nothing. Table means nothing. Or money means nothing. But kesef in Hebrew, kesef, kesef, which is money, means desire. It manifests the core, the essence of what money is. Desire, right? So when Moses asks, "What is your name?" that I should tell them, he wants to know, what's your character? What Moses was actually asking was like, they're going to ask me, God came to save us? Where's he been for the past 210 years? Where's he been for the past 86 years of brutal oppression? That's what they're going to want to know. They're going to want to know, what's his character? What's your name? And what does he answer, like Corey said? On text 17, text 10b, page 17. God replies the most enigmatic, magnificent answer on his business card. He replied to Moses, Eheyeh, Asher Eheyeh. I'm going to put it to you on the screen. Eheyeh, Asher Eheyeh, which means I am. I am. That's what he answered. I exist. I am the creator. I am all powerful. Eheyeh, Asher Eheyeh. I am the existing being that is the existing being. That is literally the translation of this phrase. Yeah, Asher, yeah, I am the existing being that is the existing being. You want to know what I am? I'm the core. Now that contains within it so much depth and profundity. You got questions? I'm sorry, I can't explain it to you. Because I am much greater than you. It's like the ant outside wants to know why the screens are down. Right? Do I need to go out and explain to the ant that there might be a hurricane coming tomorrow? I'm not, me and the ant are so far removed from each other. There's no way I'm going to explain to the ant why we moved the table yesterday, right? The difference between me and God is more than the difference between me and an ant. Because both of us are created beings. We're very similar. But me and God is creator. I'm just creation. Our distance is much greater. I'm more likely to explain it to the ant than God is able to explain to me why we suffer. Gail, you were about to say something?
Maybe this is future tense.
Yeah, it is. And that's part of the enigma. It's part of the enigma. I shall be what I shall be.
Yeah.
Which means it's a present participle, which means always existing. It's not something like I existed or I will exist. I am existing is the term. I am existing as I am existing. I'm always existing. You understand what I'm saying? Does that make sense? A present participle. It's a meditative point right there. To be able to think of God as the core of life that always exists, that is independent of any other influence or stimulus or anything else. Something to think about there, Gail. So yes, to answer your question, Ross,
Yeah.
God says this on his business card. He says, I shall be, or I am who I am. I am existing as I am existing. And that's what he says to Moses to tell them.
So he doesn't say I'm God.
Well, we already said that.
Where?
Moses says, when I go to the children of Israel to inform them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, right? They will respond, what is his name? What is your character? So instead of God describing his character, which is impossible, like we already discussed, he just gives us his very essential existence. His most outstanding and unique attribute is that he always exists. You see that? Now, Maimonides actually gives us a little more explanation, Gail. This might make you a little happier, give you a little more meat to chew on here. I'm serious, because this is an ethereal concept. Let's take a look at page 18, text number 11. As Maimonides gives us a little more meat to understand what this means. This phrase, and these are all meditative texts, to think about. This phrase conveys that God's existence is not an ordinary existence. We could summarize the concept as such. God is the existence that exists. In other words, he is an essential existence. He is an essential, absolute, rather than a contingent existence. He's not dependent on something else. He's not answerable to a higher power. He's not relying on a turtle that goes below. He is the core, I am. And that is the meditation to think about over here. As we define the divine, as we confront this magnificent idea. Now, this idea is totally out of the box. It's totally out of our box, because everything that we know has a definition. It has a color, has an expiration date. I was looking at my milk bottle this morning, my bottle of milk, the kosher milk. It has the expiration date in the Hebrew calendar. I thought that was kind of cool, yeah? The Rosh Chodesh Kislev is the expiration date. Here in America, it's kind of cool, right? But, for us to think of anything that has no expiration date, what? Right? Even the sun has an expiration date. To think something has no beginning, Beli Reshit, Beli Tachlit. That's Adon Olam, right? Without a beginning, without an end, those are the words of Adon Olam. What do you mean it has no beginning? What do you mean it has no end? This is an idea that is totally out of our box. It's a lech lecha. It's go out, go beyond your perception. It's out of our box. It's a deconstruction of our prior idea of a vengeful, angry, insecure, weak, amnesia God. Then now we're understanding a little bit more. You know, what's amazing here is that when we realize how infinite God is, as you described, or maybe it was Leah, describing how infinite God is. And you're like, where do I fit into this picture? Like, what does he want from me? Right? That's a question that's going to come up soon. But once we can build towards that question by understanding God's infinity.
Beyond infinite.
Beyond infinite. Well, whatever that means. That too is
see that.
You know, there's a great story out of Chelm. Anybody heard of Chelm? The wise men of Chelm. Apparently it was a town back in Poland that was actually made of wise people that were very wise. But the jokes, they became like the brunt of many jokes in Yiddish. So they say a story about the first locomotive that came to Chelm. For hundreds of years, thousands of years, everybody was on a horse and buggy. And now comes a train, a locomotive. So they send the wise men of Chelm to discover, to unearth the secrets of this locomotive that doesn't apparently have a horse pulling it. So they inspect and they pull and they look under, they look over and they look. And the engineer says, "What are you doing?" To which the wise man says, "I know that there's a tiny horse in there somewhere." Right? Because he's so stuck in his way that you can't move without a horse, that he couldn't possibly fathom there could be a motion without a horse. Right? So we can get stuck in our definition of saying there's got to be an expiration date there somewhere. There's got to be a beginning. There's got to be a primordial source, but you got to get over that and say, no, this is the rock. This is the core. That's why it's so cool to have a relationship with Hashem. Everything else is just so shallow. What are you going to pledge allegiance to? You want to pledge allegiance? You want to worship something enduring, something infinite, not something which is just, you don't worship a Putin or a Stalin or some other dictator. You want to worship someone that's infinite. And again, someone is already defining. So God, Hashem, was infinite. Okay, let's go on to our final. Our final question. So we conclude that one by saying that God is not a contingent existence. I am existing as I am existing. His business card, amazing. So guys, what do you say? He's got a he or a she. Let's settle this once and for all.
I guess.
You know Sandy Vigler? He tells me that he prayed to God and she said, she likes to say that. And she said, so he's got a he or a she. Let's settle this once and for all. Woke guy.
Depends. Refer to both.
Might just be woke, actually, now that you mention that.
Refer to both.
Do you think God is a male? Anybody, Leah, think God is male? Do you think he is male? Dory? On the fence. Leaning towards male. What?
He's spirit, so non-binary.
Ah, non-binary now. Okay, very woke now. Okay, good. Right? You think it's ridiculous to define his sex?
Yes.
I'm with you too. I'm with you too. I agree with you. You know, it's actually based upon what we've learned so far. The question is not even a question anymore. What do you mean? We just said that God is infinite, almighty, indescribable, no characteristic, no feature, unknowable. And you want to know which gender he has, which bathroom he uses? I mean, seriously, this is ridiculous. It makes no sense. The question is a ridiculous question. We just learned in text number 5, that first meditative text. We said that God is simple, free of any definition.
So then why do we call him he?
Oh, so why are we calling him? Clearly God is genderless, like you're saying, Susan. Clearly God is non-binary. But the question of terminology is, why do we call him a he? Right? Why do we say our father, our king? Why don't we say our mother, our queen?
We're not in England.
Imenu Malkatenu, we could say. Imenu Malkatenu instead of Avinu Malkenu. Right? What are we doing here? What, in terms of terminology, we understand essentially the question is ridiculous. But, yes.
But like, really, who cares? It's intellectualizing it, which is what we really.
I'll tell you why we care. Fine. So you're saying it's just semantics.
It's
semantics. Okay, fair enough. You could dismiss it, Susan, and say, you know what? Maybe the authors were just sexist. The authors of the early prayers, they were stuck in their little ways where it was a male-dominated society, and women were relegated to the kitchen barefoot and pregnant. And maybe that's just the way that they did it. The authors of the early prayers, right? Not the Torah, because the Torah is written by God. But that would not be the case because, that can't be the case, because we find in many places that God is referred to in a feminine, or holiness is referred to in the feminine sense. Take a look. Shekhinah. Shekhinah is the divine presence in the feminine form. Take a look. So when we speak about the Jewish nation, we talk about a feminine term. We don't use a sexist male term. When we're talking about the Torah, and all these are in the textbook, you can see it there later. The Torah, the divine human soul, Nefesh Elokit, right? The land of Israel is called in the feminine. The Sabbath is described in the feminine. But the Shekhinah, the divine presence, is spoken in the feminine. So you could answer that in Hebrew, we just don't have gender neutral nouns. Like French, you're going to make a decision. In English, when you say you, it could be you, male or female. But in Hebrew, it doesn't work like that. Ata is you male, at is you female. So Hebrew doesn't give us an option. It's either one or the other. You got to take a pick, right? So if that would be our answer, then why are we choosing male and not female?
Does it depend on?
If it's purely semantics, what?
Does it depend on where referring to God and what mode he is in?
Oh, yeah. That's how I'm going. Absolutely. Now I'm going to say this. We find, if you look in the Torah, we'll find that God is actually male and female.
That's what I said.
Yep, you'll find that God is androgynous. Okay, why is God androgynous here? God on the screen. God created the human in His image, male and female. He created them. Now that's an interesting verse right there on the screen from Genesis. When God created the world, created us, He created man in His image. Man was created. Man and woman, well, back to without getting too technical. Adam was androgynous, okay? Yeah. And when we say that the rib, Eve was created from the rib, that's actually a Christian mistranslation. She wasn't taken from his rib, she was taken from his side. Adam was cut in half. Back to back was man and woman. Initially, when man was created, Adam and Eve were created as one. It says right here in the verse, male and female created them. It says right there. The being was male and female, which is why it says that when you get married, that therefore, in the act of marital intimacy, you're actually reflecting the divine.
Yep.
Because when man and woman come together as one, they actually now reflect the divine, which is why they're able to create like God can create. Interesting. When do we create life? When we come together, male and female, as one, because now we're in the image of God. God is not just genderless or non-binary. God is actually intersex, which means hermaphrodite or androgynous. Hermaphroditic, right? And Nachmanides in the 13th century, text 13, he talks about this. He says, all divine names, and 13th century is way before the female revolution, right? All divine names and attributes appear on occasion in each gender, male and female gender. Thus, our sages regularly refer to the divine presence, the Shekhinah, in the feminine. The divine names appear in both feminine and masculine forms because God's indivisible unity is revealed within this plurality. And they are all unified within God's unity. What this means is that there are aspects of God's nature that are male and aspects of God's nature that are female. You need both for perfection. What does that mean? On a very practical level, a male is the giver. The male anatomy is such that the male protrudes and the female in Hebrew actually means a cavity or an inclusion, right? Because the male gives seed to the female that receives the seed. The man is the giver, the woman is the recipient. Man is the conqueror, woman is the nurturer, right? So when we talk about God as the giver, who is he giving to? Song of Songs, you'll see text 15. We are married to God. We are the ones that are married to God. God is the divine groom, and we are the terrestrial bride. So when we pray, for example, we're asking God to give us, nurture our needs, we're saying God in the masculine. But when we do a mitzvah, we are giving to God. because God, we will learn this later in the seminar, but God actually needs us for something, and that's why he created us. We now become the givers, and God is actually the recipient of that choice, of that action, of that light that was created. So when we refer to God in masculine, we speak of him as the giver, right? And just like in a marriage, both spouses need each other and nurture each other. So too, in our relationship with God, we are sometimes givers and we are sometimes recipients. So referring to God using masculine terms reminds us of who we are and how much God loves us and gives to us. And then, and if we say, is God a he or she or a they? We'll say that God is neither a male nor a female. That's ridiculous and absurd, because God manifests in both modalities, and it all depends on which perspective of God we're talking about. Let's summarize everything we've learned in a 2-minute video. Here it is, just a 2-minute summary.
Lesson 1. The basics. 1. Asking questions about God is not a sign of weakness in belief. Even the ardent believer must do so in an attempt to gain deeper understandings of God. It is important that our relationship with God encompasses our totality, and that our minds should understand what our souls naturally feel. 2. Many of our conceptions of God are incorrect and even childish. Like Abraham long ago, we need to first unknow the God of our current perception before we can gain an accurate understanding of the divine. 3. Although we can know much about God, he himself is unknowable. The essence of idolatry is the attempt to concretize God and fit him within a familiar framework to create a God in our own image. 4. In Jewish sources, we find depictions of God being located above in the heavens, and we are also told that God is everywhere. While these are both true from a certain perspective, there's a deeper reality. God contains the world, holding all its existence in his space. Everywhere is within God. 5. God's existence is radically different from the existence of all else. All things but God are contingent existences, brought into being by a cause, and by definition, they need not exist. God is a necessary existence, an existence that must be, and therefore has no cause. 6. On an essential level, God transcends gender and is non-binary. Yet God manifests himself in both male and female modalities. When we refer to God in masculine terms, we refer to God as he manifests or behaves in a masculine manner, i.e., as our provider and husband. Doing so places emphasis on our importance to God and our relationship with him.
Okay, so that's a wrap for tonight's discussion. I thank you very much for joining me here tonight. I would love to hear your questions and your comments and your feedback. If you're on Zoom, you can feel free to send me an email, rabbi@jewishgardens.com, or if you're live, would love to hear your comments. If you want to stick around, questions and comments. I hope you enjoyed the session tonight.
Really good.
And thank you very much. And I hope we'll see you guys next week. The goal is to keep it moving, keep it light, keep it interesting, but keep it heavy at the same time, full of content.